Did you know that some of the first mechanical clocks weren't built for merchants, but for monks? They needed to know when to pray, even in the middle of the night. Or that a simple Benedictine rule from the 6th century, ora et labora, pray and work, created one of the most stable and productive economic systems in European history. We think of the Middle Ages as dark. We imagine grime, ignorance, and superstition. But inside the stone walls of monasteries across Europe, a different kind of life was being lived. It was a life of structure, silence, and incredible focus. The monks were the guardians of knowledge, the pioneers of agriculture, and the quiet engineers of the soul. They were trying to solve a problem we still struggle with today. How do you live a good life in a chaotic world? How do you find peace when everything is screaming for your attention? We have more technology, more information, and more freedom than they could ever have imagined. But are we any happier? Are our minds any quieter? Maybe they knew something we've forgotten. Maybe their ancient wisdom is more relevant now than ever before. Let's look at what we can learn from them. Number 20. Why are we so afraid to think about the end? We don't talk about death. It happens in hospitals behind closed doors. We use soft words like passed away or lost. We spend billions on anti-aging creams and dye our hair, all in a frantic attempt to outrun the inevitable. Our culture is a culture of death denial. The medieval monk did the exact opposite. He lived with a constant reminder of his own mortality. It was called memento mori, which is Latin for remember you will die. It wasn't a morbid obsession. It was a tool for living. Many monks kept a human skull on their desk, not for a Gothic fashion statement, but as a focusing object. The Rule of St. Benedict, written around the year 516, is one of the most influential documents in Western civilization. It's a guide for how to live in a monastic community. In chapter 4, called The Tools for Good Works, the 47th tool is simple: to keep death daily before one's eyes. Like, why would you do that? Like, it sounds depressing. But the monks understood a deep psychological truth. Confronting the reality of your death doesn't make life worse. It makes it infinitely more precious. When you know your time is limited, you stop wasting it on trivial things. The petty argument with a coworker, the obsession with getting more followers, the anxiety over a dent in your card, it all fades into the background. Memento mori is a filter. It helps you separate what truly matters from what doesn't. The Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca understood this long before the monks. Seneca wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." This isn't about giving up. It's about showing up right now for the life you actually have. Modern psychology is just catching up to this ancient wisdom. There's a field of study called terror management theory, or TMT, developed in the 1980s by psychologists Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyshinsky. It suggests that the fear of death is a primary driver of human behavior. We build up cultural worldviews, chase self-esteem, and form groups to give our lives a sense of meaning and permanence, all to manage the terror of our own non-existence. But this often happens unconsciously, leading to prejudice and conflict. The monks' approach was to bring this fear into the light. By consciously confronting death, they weren't controlled by it. A 2017 meta-analysis led by Kenneth Vail looked at hundreds of studies on death awareness. It found that while reminders of death can sometimes cause anxiety, they can also lead to positive outcomes. People become more compassionate, more willing to help others, and more appreciative of life. Thinking about the end makes you a better person in the here and now. The monks weren't trying to escape the world. They were trying to live in it properly. Remembering death was the key. It was a daily dose of perspective that kept their priorities straight. It wasn't about dying. It was about how to live. What if our entire consumer culture is just a massive, complicated distraction from the fear of death? Could a simple, conscious reminder of our mortality break its spell? If our brains are wired to avoid the thought of our own end, is practicing memento mori a form of cognitive rebellion against our own programming? Has our success in hiding death from daily life accidentally created a new kind of background anxiety that we can't name and therefore can't resolve? Number 19. What does it mean to truly welcome a stranger? In our world, the stranger is a threat. We have security cameras, alarm systems, and gated communities. We lock our doors. We are suspicious of people we don't know. The word stranger is tied to the word danger. In the monastery, the opposite was true. The stranger was seen as a manifestation of Christ himself. Chapter 53 of the Rule of St. Benedict is titled On the Reception of Guests. It is one of the longest and most detailed chapters in the entire rule. It begins with this line, "Let all guests who arrive be received like Christ." Not just the important ones, not just the wealthy ones, all of them. The rule is incredibly specific. The abbot himself should wash the guests' feet. Special food should be prepared for them. The monks were to greet the guests with a bow, a sign of profound humility and respect. This wasn't just a nice idea, it was a core part of their spiritual practice. For the monks, hospitality, or xenodoukia in Greek, wasn't about being a good host in the modern sense of entertaining friends. It was a radical act of empathy and service. It was about seeing the divine in the face of someone you've never met. This practice transformed monasteries into the first hotels, hospitals, and safe havens of Europe. During the so-called Dark Ages, when travel was dangerous and infrastructure had collapsed after the fall of the Roman Empire, a traveler could journey across the continent, finding food, shelter, and safety at the network of monasteries along the way. The monks of St. Bernard Pass in the Alps, for example, became famous for their hospitality and their dogs who rescued stranded travelers from the snow. They did this for nearly 1,000 years, saving an estimated 2,000 lives. This practice has deep psychological roots. Research in social psychology shows us how easily we divide the world into us and them. This is called in-group, out-group bias. We naturally favor people who are like us and are suspicious of those who are different. The monastic practice of hospitality was a direct countermeasure to this basic human tendency. By forcing themselves to treat every stranger with the highest possible honor, they were actively rewiring their own brains to be more open, compassionate, and less fearful. Sociologist Robert Putnam, in his famous book Bowling Alone, documented the decline of social capital and community in modern America. We are more isolated than ever. We trust our neighbors less. We interact with strangers less. The monks understood that a healthy society is built on trust, and trust is built through these small, repeated acts of openness. Their rule of hospitality wasn't just about being kind to travelers. It was about weaving the very fabric of society, one guest at a time. It was a technology for building community in a fractured world. What if our fear of strangers is a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating the very dangers we are trying to avoid? If we were to practice a modern form of this radical hospitality, what would it look like in our cities and neighborhoods? Could the simple act of welcoming a stranger be a more powerful tool for social change than any policy or protest? Is the decline in face-to-face interaction with people outside our in-group fundamentally reshaping our brains to be more fearful and less empathetic? Number 18. Does the act of writing by hand change how we think? We type. On keyboards, on glass screens, we tap and we swipe. The act of forming letters with our hands is becoming a lost art. Many schools have even stopped teaching cursive. We think of writing as just a way to get thoughts from our brain into a document. The medium doesn't matter, only the message. The medieval monk would have disagreed. For him, the physical act of writing was a spiritual and intellectual discipline. Before the printing press was invented by Gutenberg around 1440, every single book in Europe was copied by hand. This work was done primarily by monks in a room called the scriptorium. It was slow, painstaking work. A single Bible could take a team of monks over a year to produce. The monk didn't just copy the words. He inhabited them. The slow movement of the quill across the vellum, the mixing of the ink, the careful formation of each letter, it was a form of meditation. It was a way to think deeply about the text he was transcribing. This isn't just romantic nostalgia. Modern neuroscience is showing us that the monks were onto something. When you write by hand, your brain is more active than when you type. Studies using fMRI scans show that forming letters by hand activates parts of the brain involved in thinking, language, and working memory. Psychologist Stanislas Dehaene, a leading expert on the neuroscience of reading, has shown that the specific gestures involved in handwriting leave a motor memory in the brain's sensory-motor cortex. This helps us recognize letters and ultimately learn to read more effectively. One study from Princeton University by Pam Mueller and Daniel Oppenheimer found that students who took notes by hand learned and remembered more than students who typed their notes. The typists tended to transcribe the lecture verbatim without processing it. The handwriters had to listen, digest, and summarize. The slowness of the pen forced them to think. The monks took this even further with the art of illumination, like they didn't just copy words, they decorated them. The intricate borders, the gold leaf, the beautiful illustrations in manuscripts like the Book of Kells or the Lindisfarne Gospels weren't just pretty pictures. They were a form of visual commentary. They were the monk's own meditation on the text made visible. This act of creation, of blending word and image, required a level of focus and engagement that is almost unimaginable to us in our age of distraction. The slowness of the process was the point. It was a way to slow down the mind and engage with information on a level far deeper than mere comprehension. It was about transformation. The monk wasn't just making a book, the book was remaking him. We value speed and efficiency. We want to type faster, communicate quicker. The monks valued depth and permanence. Their handwritten books were designed to last 1,000 years. Our digital text can be deleted in a second. Have we outsourced a part of our thinking process to the keyboard? What cognitive abilities are we losing as we abandon the pen and the pencil? If the physical act of writing helps us to think and remember, what is the long-term consequence of a generation that rarely writes by hand? Could the slowness and deliberateness of handwriting be an antidote to the shallow, rapid-fire thinking encouraged by our digital tools? Number 17, have we forgotten the pharmacy in our backyard? When we get sick, we go to a pharmacy. We get a prescription for a pill that was manufactured in a factory hundreds of miles away. We trust the science, the white coats, and the sterile packaging. The medieval monk, when he got sick, went to the garden. Every monastery had an infirmary and, right next to it, a physic garden. This was a garden dedicated to growing medicinal herbs. The monks were the doctors and pharmacists of the medieval world. They preserved and copied ancient medical texts from Greece and Rome, like the works of Galen and Dioscorides. But they also engaged in their own form of scientific research. They observed, experimented, and recorded the effects of different plants. The plan of St. Gall, an architectural drawing of an ideal monastery from the early 9th century, shows a detailed layout for a physic garden with 16 specific medicinal plants, including sage, rosemary, fennel, and mint. This wasn't folklore or magic. It was practical, empirical medicine. The monks knew that willow bark could reduce fever and pain. We now know it contains salicin, the active ingredient in aspirin. They knew that foxglove digitalis could treat heart conditions. We now use digitalin, derived from the same plant, for congestive heart failure. They used moldy bread to treat infected wounds, a practice that presaged Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin in 1928 by 1,000 years. Their knowledge was vast. The Abbess Hildegard of Bingen, a remarkable German Benedictine nun from the 12th century, wrote extensive books on medicine and natural history like her Physica. She cataloged hundreds of plants and their uses, blending traditional knowledge with her own sharp observations. The monastic approach to healing was holistic. They understood that health wasn't just about treating symptoms. It was connected to diet, rest, and spiritual well-being. The simple, balanced diet of the monastery, rich in vegetables from their gardens and fermented foods like bread and beer, was itself a form of preventative medicine. In our modern world, we've become disconnected from the sources of our food and medicine. We see nature as a place for recreation, a park to visit on the weekend, not as a living system that sustains us. There is a growing body of research around what is sometimes called biophilia, the idea that humans have an innate tendency to connect with nature. Studies have shown that spending time in green spaces can reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and improve mental health. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, is now being prescribed by doctors. The monks didn't need a study to tell them this. Their life was deeply embedded in the natural cycles of the seasons. They worked the land, grew their own food, and found their medicine in the earth. They understood, in a way we have forgotten, that human health and the health of the planet are not separate things. As we face the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, are we overlooking a vast library of potential new medicines in the plants of the natural world? By separating our medicine from our environment, have we lost a crucial understanding of what it means to be healthy? What if the simple act of gardening, of putting our hands in the soil, has measurable therapeutic benefits that we are only just beginning to understand scientifically? Is our sterile indoor existence contributing to the rise of autoimmune diseases and allergies by depriving our bodies of the complex microbial ecosystems found in nature? Number 16. How did we become slaves to the clock we invented? We live by the clock. Our day is sliced into seconds, minutes, and hours. We have deadlines, appointments, and schedules. We are constantly racing against time. We even say we are running out of time as if it's a resource we can deplete. This obsession with the clock is a relatively new invention, and we have the monks to thank for it. For most of human history, time was fluid. It was governed by the sun, the moon, and the seasons. People knew it was morning, noon, or night. That was enough. But the monks needed more precision. Their life was structured around a series of 8 daily prayer services called the Divine Office or the Liturgy of the Hours. These had to happen at specific times, day and night. The Rule of St. Benedict lays out a detailed schedule from matins in the middle of the night to compline after sunset. To keep the schedule, they needed a reliable way to tell time, especially on cloudy days or in the dark. So they became innovators in timekeeping. Early on, they used sundials, water clocks, clepsydras, and candles marked with hours. But these were imprecise. The real breakthrough came in the late 13th and early 14th centuries with the invention of the first mechanical clocks. These weren't little clocks on a mantelpiece. They were massive iron machines driven by weights with no hands or face. Their only job was to strike a bell to call the monks to prayer. Historian and sociologist Lewis Mumford, in his 1934 book Technics and Civilization, argued that the mechanical clock, not the steam engine, was the key machine of the modern industrial age. He claimed the monastery was the birthplace of this new regimented world. The clock broke time away from human events and natural cycles. It turned time into an abstract mathematical sequence of uniform units. The regular disciplined life of the monastery, with its bells ringing out the hours, was the blueprint for the factory, the school, and the office. The monks created the clock to serve God, but the clock was eventually used to serve commerce. It allowed for the synchronization of labor, the charging of interest, and the rigid scheduling of modern life. We now carry this precision timekeeping device in our pockets. Our smartphones don't just tell time, they manage our entire lives, buzzing and beeping to keep us on schedule. We have gained incredible efficiency. But what have we lost? We've lost a sense of kairos, a Greek word for the right or opportune moment, as opposed to chronos, the sequential, measurable time. The monk's schedule, while rigid, was designed to create a rhythm of prayer, work, and rest. It was a framework for a meaningful life, not just an efficient one. Our schedule is often about maximizing productivity, squeezing every last drop out of every minute. We have become, as Mumford put it, timekeepers, and then time savers, and at last time servers. The tool the monks invented to structure their devotion has become the tool that structures our anxiety. What happens to the human mind when its internal biological rhythms are constantly overridden by the external mechanical rhythm of the clock? Has our obsession with measuring time in smaller and smaller units made us less patient and more anxious? If the monks used a strict schedule to free their minds for contemplation, why does our modern, equally strict schedule seem to only create more stress and mental clutter? Is there a way to use the clock, as the monks did, as a tool for structuring a good life, rather than as a master that dictates our every move? And number 15, what happened to making things that last? Look around you, the chair you're sitting on, the phone in your hand, the clothes you're wearing. How long will they last? We live in a world of planned obsolescence. Products are designed to break or become outdated, so we have to buy new ones. We generate mountains of waste. It's a throwaway culture. The medieval monk lived in a different reality. He made things to last for eternity. The monasteries themselves are a testament to this. And cathedrals, like Notre Dame in Paris or Canterbury in England, were built over centuries. The men who laid the first stones knew they would never see the final spire. They were building for their great-grandchildren and for God. They weren't just constructing a building, they were creating a legacy. This mindset applied to everything they did. The manuscripts they copied were made with vellum animal skin, not paper, and inks made from ground minerals and plants. That's why we can still read them today, 1,000 years later. Their woodworking, their metalwork, their agriculture, it was all based on principles of durability, stewardship, and permanence. This wasn't just about good craftsmanship, it was a reflection of their worldview. They believed in a stable, ordered universe created by God. Their job was to reflect that order and stability in their own work. The Benedictine value of stabilitas, stability, was crucial. A monk typically entered a monastery and stayed there for his entire life. This commitment to one place fostered a long-term perspective. You don't take shortcuts when you have to live with the consequences of your work for the next 50 years. You don't exhaust the soil in your fields when that same soil has to feed your brothers for generations to come. This is the opposite of our modern transient culture, where we move from city to city, job to job, and product to product. The economist E.F. Schumacher wrote a book in 1973 called Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. He criticized the modern obsession with endless growth and mass production. He advocated for technologies and economic systems that were sustainable, human scale, and focused on quality, not just quantity. In many ways, he was describing the economic model of the medieval monastery. The monks were masters of sustainable agriculture. They cleared forests, drained swamps, and developed new farming techniques like the three-field crop rotation system, which improved soil fertility. The Cistercian monks in particular were brilliant agricultural engineers known for their advanced water management systems. They built canals and water mills that powered their grain mills, forges, and workshops. They weren't just extracting resources from the land, they were improving it. They saw themselves not as owners of the land, but as stewards. Their work was an act of co-creation with God. This long-term thinking is desperately needed today as we face environmental crises like climate change and resource depletion. The monks teach us that true progress is not about doing things faster, but about doing things better and making things that endure. What psychological effect does living in an environment full of disposable, short-lived objects have on us? Does it make us feel that our own lives are more transient and less meaningful? If we were to adopt a monastic standard of craftsmanship in one area of our lives, what would we choose to create, and how would it change our relationship with the world? Is the concept of sustainability just a modern, secular version of the monastic value of stewardship? Can we build a modern economy based on permanence and quality, or is our system now permanently addicted to disposability and growth? Number 14, can sound change our brains? Our world is noisy. Cars, sirens, notifications, background music in every store. Even when we seek quiet, we often fill it with podcasts or music through our headphones. We are rarely in silence, and when we are, the sounds we hear are mostly random and chaotic. The monastery was a world of curated sound. There was the quiet hum of work, the tolling of the bell, and most importantly, the sound of the human voice joined in song. This was Gregorian chant. For centuries, monks had been chanting the psalms and liturgies several times a day. To the modern ear, it can sound monotonous or somber, but it is a profoundly sophisticated form of music, designed for a very specific purpose to quiet the mind and elevate the spirit. The music is monophonic, meaning it has only one melodic line. There are no harmonies, no complex rhythms. The tempo is meant to follow the natural rhythm of breathing. The entire purpose of the chant is to carry the text, to let the words of the scripture wash over the listener and the singer without the distraction of a dramatic musical performance. It's not a concert, it's a prayer. Scientists are now beginning to understand the powerful effect this kind of sound can have on the human brain. Dr. Alfred Tomatis, a French physician, studied the monks of a Benedictine monastery in the 1960s. A new abbot had forbidden them from chanting, thinking it was an unnecessary use of time. Soon after, the monks became tired, depressed, and lost their motivation. Dr. Tomatis suspected it was the lack of chanting. He reintroduced the daily chanting schedule, and within months, the monks had recovered their energy and health. He theorized that the specific frequencies and rhythms of the chant were literally charging the brain, particularly the neocortex. While some of Tomatis' theories are controversial, modern research supports the general idea. Studies on the effects of music on the brain show that listening to and performing music can reduce stress, lower levels of the hormone cortisol, and increase the production of dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. The slow, repetitive nature of chant is particularly effective at inducing a state of relaxed alertness. It can synchronize brainwaves, leading to a state similar to meditation. The act of singing in a group also has powerful social bonding effects, releasing oxytocin, the love hormone, which promotes feelings of trust and connection. The monks who developed this music over centuries were, in effect, pioneering neuroscientists. They were conducting an experiment in psychoacoustics using trial and error to discover which sounds and melodies could best facilitate a state of contemplation and peace. They were engineering an auditory environment designed to reshape human consciousness. The music wasn't entertainment, it was a tool. In our world, music is mostly a consumer product, a soundtrack for our lives. For the monks, it was an integral part of their work and their being. It was a way of breathing together, of thinking together, and of connecting with something larger than themselves. It was a technology for tuning the soul. What have we lost by turning music from a participatory communal activity into a passive, individual consumer experience? Could specific sound frequencies and musical structures be used as a non-pharmaceutical intervention for anxiety, depression, or adhd? If the chaotic noise of our cities is constantly putting our nervous systems on high alert, what is the cumulative effect on our long-term physical and mental health? Is it possible that the ancient practice of communal chanting is a more advanced technology for mental well-being than any app on our phones? Number 13. What if boredom is a good thing? We are terrified of being bored. The moment we have a free second in a line, at a stoplight, waiting for a friend to walk, we pull out our phones. We scroll through feeds, play games, check emails. We fill every empty space with stimulation. The idea of just sitting and doing nothing seems like a waste of time. Or worse, it feels deeply uncomfortable. For the medieval monk, boredom wasn't just an occasional discomfort. It was a serious spiritual danger. They had a special name for it, acedia. This is often translated as sloth, but it's much more than simple laziness. The 4th century monk Evagrius Ponticus, one of a group of early Christian hermits known as the Desert Fathers, called acedia the noonday demon. He described it as a state of restlessness, listlessness, and an inability to concentrate on one's spiritual duties. It's that feeling of, I should be doing something, but I don't want to do anything. It's a kind of spiritual paralysis. The monks saw acedia as a profound threat, but their solution wasn't to seek more stimulation. Their solution was to endure it. They understood that the discomfort of boredom is a gateway. When you sit with that restless feeling without giving in to the urge to escape, something important happens. Your mind, deprived of external input, starts to look inward. You begin to notice your own thoughts and feelings. You are forced to confront the things you normally distract yourself from. The cure for the noonday demon wasn't entertainment, it was prayer, manual labor, and sticking to the routine, no matter how you felt. It was about pushing through the boredom to find the focus and peace on the other side. This is a radical idea in our culture. We see boredom as a problem to be solved, a void to be filled. The monks saw it as an opportunity for self-confrontation and growth. Modern neuroscience supports this view. When our brains are in a resting state, not focused on a specific task, a network of brain regions called the default mode network, DMN, becomes active. The DMN is involved in self-referential thought, daydreaming, and creativity. It's the part of our brain that connects disparate ideas and generates new insights. By constantly bombarding our brains with external stimuli, we may be starving our default mode network. We are so busy consuming information that we never give our brains the quiet time they need to process it and make new connections. A 2014 study by Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia found that people would rather give themselves a mild electric shock than sit alone in a room with their thoughts for just 15 minutes. That's how desperate we are to avoid the state of boredom that the monks leaned into. The monks' structured life of repetition and silence was, in a way, a perfect environment for cultivating deep thought. The boredom wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It was the fallow ground where the seeds of insight could sprout. Is our constant search for stimulation a form of addiction? And is boredom the painful but necessary experience of withdrawal? By curing boredom with our devices, are we accidentally suppressing our own creativity and capacity for self-reflection? What would happen if we scheduled boredom into our day, just as we schedule meetings and workouts? Could the spiritual crisis of acedia, described by 4th century monks, be a more accurate diagnosis of our modern malaise than any clinical term? Number 12 is being humble a weakness or a strength. In our culture, humility gets a bad rap. We associate it with being weak, passive, or having low self-esteem. We are told to lean in, to promote our personal brand, to project confidence at all times. The hero of our society is the bold entrepreneur, the charismatic leader, the self-made individual who trusts their own vision above all else. Humility seems like a disadvantage in such a world. For the monk, humility was the absolute foundation of spiritual life. It was the most important virtue, the one on which all others were built. Chapter 7 of the Rule of St. Benedict is all about humility, and it describes a 12-step ladder to achieving it. This isn't the false humility of putting yourself down. It is the radical act of seeing yourself and your place in the universe with total honesty. The Latin word for humility, humilitas, comes from the word humus, meaning earth or ground. To be humble is to be grounded, to know what you are made of. It's about recognizing your own limitations, your own flaws, and your dependence on others and on God. The first step on Benedict's ladder of humility is to live with a constant sense of awe and reverence. The last step is to have a humility that is visible in your very posture and demeanor. This might sound like a recipe for becoming a doormat, but the monks understood it as the source of true strength. When you are humble, you are teachable. You are open to feedback and correction because your ego isn't constantly on the defensive. You can learn from anyone because you don't assume you already have all the answers. The scientist and inventor Isaac Newton famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." That is a statement of profound intellectual humility. It's an acknowledgement that all knowledge is built on the work of others. This is the kind of humility that allows for progress and discovery. Jim Collins, in his best-selling business book Good to Great, studied companies that made the leap from being average to being exceptional. He found that their leaders all shared a surprising combination of traits: fierce professional will and deep personal humility. They were ambitious for their company, not for themselves. They were quick to give credit to others for success and take responsibility for failures. They were, in essence, monastic in their leadership style. The practice of humility in the monastery was built into the structure of daily life. Monks had to obey the abbot. They had to perform menial tasks. They had to confess their faults to one another. These practices were designed to systematically dismantle the ego. In our world, we are encouraged to build up our ego. Our social media profiles are curated highlight reels of our lives. We are encouraged to see ourselves as the center of our own story. The monks remind us that this is a recipe for anxiety and isolation. True confidence doesn't come from believing you are better than others. It comes from knowing your own worth so deeply that you don't need to prove it. It's the quiet strength of the person who has nothing to hide and nothing to defend. If humility is the key to learning, is our culture's emphasis on self-promotion actually making us less intelligent? What is the difference between genuine self-esteem and the fragile ego that our culture encourages us to build? Could the practice of intellectual humility, the willingness to admit you might be wrong, be the single most important skill for navigating our complex, polarized world? Is it possible that the most powerful and effective people are the ones who never seek the spotlight? Number 11, why can't we just do one thing at a time? Check your email while on a conference call. Listen to a podcast while you cook dinner. Scroll through social media while you watch a movie. We call it multitasking, and we often treat it as a skill, a sign of efficiency and productivity. We are proud of our ability to juggle multiple streams of information at once. A medieval monk would have looked at our behavior with horrified confusion. His entire life was designed around the principle of doing one thing at a time, with complete and undivided attention. Whether he was praying, working in the fields, or copying a manuscript, he was expected to be fully present in that task. His mind was not supposed to be divided. This ideal of focused attention is at the heart of the monastic concept of contemplation. It's the ability to hold your mind on one thing, whether it's a passage of scripture, a task at hand, or the presence of God. This wasn't just for spiritual reasons. The monks understood that the quality of your attention determines the quality of your work and, ultimately, the quality of your life. The modern myth of multitasking has been thoroughly debunked by neuroscience. The human brain cannot, in fact, pay attention to two cognitive tasks at once. What we call multitasking is actually rapid task switching. Your brain is just jumping back and forth very quickly between different tasks. And every time it switches, there is a cognitive cost. Earl Miller, a neuroscientist at MIT, is a leading expert on divided attention. His research has shown that task switching burns through glucose, the fuel our brains need to stay on task. It leads to more mistakes, worse memory, and increased stress and mental fatigue. We think we're being efficient, but we're actually just making ourselves tired and stupid. The constant switching creates a feedback loop of distraction. We get a little hit of dopamine every time we check a new email or see a new notification, which trains our brains to seek out more and more distraction. We are, in effect, training ourselves to be unable to concentrate. The monk's solution to this was a structured environment that minimized distractions. The scriptorium was a place of deep, silent focus. The fields were a place of hard, physical labor. The chapel was a place of prayer. There were clear boundaries between different activities. Our modern world, especially with the smartphone, has dissolved all those boundaries. We can work anywhere, be entertained anywhere, and communicate with anyone at any time. The result is a state of continuous partial attention. We are never fully present anywhere. Cal Newport, in his book Deep Work, argues that the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task is becoming increasingly rare and therefore increasingly valuable. He profiles people who produce high-quality work by adopting an almost monastic approach, carving out long, uninterrupted blocks of time for focused effort. They are consciously rejecting the culture of multitasking and rediscovering the power of single tasking. The monks knew this 1,500 years ago. True productivity and true peace come not from doing more things at once, but from doing one thing with your whole self. If multitasking is a myth, why does our work culture continue to demand it and reward it? What is the long-term neurological impact of living in a state of continuous partial attention, especially for children whose brains are still developing? Is the feeling of being constantly overwhelmed and busy a result of having too much to do, or a result of how we are choosing to do it? Could the simple act of putting your phone in another room for a few hours a day be a more effective productivity hack than any app or system? Number 10. Have we lost the ability to remember? Before you had a smartphone, how many phone numbers did you know by heart? Probably quite a few. Now, for most of us, the answer is maybe one or two. We have outsourced our memory. Our phones remember numbers, appointments, birthdays, and directions. The internet is our external brain. If we need to know something, we just look it up. This is incredibly convenient. But what if it's making our internal memory weaker? The medieval monk lived in a world where memory was a primary intellectual tool. Before the widespread availability of books, and certainly before the printing press, a person's knowledge was what they could hold in their own mind. Monks, in particular, were masters of memory. They were expected to memorize huge amounts of text. The entire book of Psalms, all 150 of them, was the basic text they had to know by heart. They also memorized the Gospels, liturgical texts, and the writings of church fathers. This wasn't just rote memorization. They used sophisticated techniques, many inherited from classical Greek and Roman orators. These techniques, known as the art of memory, often involved creating a memory palace. You would visualize a familiar building, like your monastery, and then place the things you wanted to remember in different rooms and locations within that building. To recall the information, you would simply take a mental walk through your palace. This act of memorization was not seen as a tedious chore. It was a way of internalizing a text, of making it a part of you. When you have a poem or a piece of scripture memorized, you carry it with you always. You can reflect on it while you are walking, working, or lying awake at night. Or it becomes a part of the furniture of your mind. The historian Mary Carruthers, in her book The Book of Memory, argues that for medieval culture, memory was not just about storage and retrieval. It was the basis of creativity. To be a creative thinker, you had to have a well-stocked, well-organized memory. And new ideas were formed by finding new connections between the things you had already stored in your mind. We tend to think of creativity as a spontaneous flash of insight. The medievals saw it as the careful, deliberate work of weaving together remembered knowledge. Our reliance on external memory aids is a form of what some cognitive scientists call cognitive offloading. It frees up our brains to think about other things. But there's a growing concern about the Google effect. A 2011 study published in the journal Science by Betsy Sparrow and her colleagues showed that when people know that information will be saved for them externally, they are less likely to remember the information itself and more likely to just remember where to find it. We are becoming experts at information retrieval, but not necessarily at information retention. The monks believed that knowledge had to be digested and assimilated to become wisdom. Our modern approach is more like cognitive grazing. We consume vast quantities of information, but very little of it sticks. We are drowning in data, but starved for wisdom. The monk's practice of memorization was a way to build a strong internal intellectual framework. We are building a fragile external one. By offloading our memory to devices, are we weakening the neural pathways that support long-term memory formation? What is the difference between knowing a fact, because you can look it up in 2 seconds, and knowing it because it is part of your memorized mental library? If creativity comes from connecting ideas stored in memory, is our collective creativity at risk as our collective memory atrophies? Is it possible that the ancient art of memory is a powerful cognitive enhancement tool that we have foolishly abandoned? That's number 9. How do we care for a place as if it's forever? Most of us don't stay put. The average American moves 11.7 times in their lifetime. We switch jobs, cities, and homes. Our relationship with the places we live is often temporary and transactional. We are renters, not just of our apartments, but of our communities and our landscapes. We use a place for a while and then we move on. This transience shapes how we treat our environment. Why invest in a local community you're going to leave in 3 years? Why plant a tree that you'll never see grow to maturity? The monastic life was built on the opposite principle, stability. The Latin word is stabilitas. When a monk took his vows, he made a promise of stability, a commitment to remain in that specific monastery for the rest of his life. This vow is unique to the Benedictine tradition, and it had profound consequences. It meant that the monk's life was completely intertwined with the life of his community and his physical place. He couldn't just leave if he had a disagreement with the abbot or if the crops failed. He had to stay and work it out. This created an incredibly powerful incentive for long-term thinking and stewardship. This principle of stability turned monasteries into centers of agricultural and environmental innovation. The monks had to live on the produce of their land, not just for one season, but for centuries. They had a multi-generational perspective. They understood that if they depleted the soil or polluted the water, their own brothers would suffer the consequences 50 or 100 years in the future. So they became masters of sustainable forestry, carefully managing their woodlands to provide a continuous supply of timber without clear cutting. They terraced hillsides to prevent soil erosion. As mentioned before, the Cistercians were hydraulic engineers, building complex systems of canals and drains to turn marshland into productive farmland. They weren't just thinking about next year's harvest, they were thinking about the harvest in the year 1300 while working in the year 1200. This is a form of stewardship that is almost unimaginable in our short-term, profit-driven world. The environmental writer Wendell Berry has spoken extensively about the importance of being placed, of belonging to a specific piece of land and a community. He argues that our environmental problems stem from a failure of imagination, an inability to see how our actions affect the places we live. The vow of stability was a technology for cultivating that imagination. It forced the monks to see their home not as a resource to be exploited, but as a legacy to be preserved. This long-term perspective is desperately needed today. Our political cycles are 2 to 4 years. Corporate earnings are reported every 3 months. We are structurally incentivized to prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. The result is climate change, resource depletion, and a damaged planet that we are passing on to future generations. The monks offer a different model. Their stability created a closed loop of cause and effect. They had to live with the results of their actions. Our globalized, transient world has broken that loop. The consequences of our consumption are often felt by people in other parts of the world or by future generations. The vow of stability is a call to reconnect with our places, to take responsibility for them, and to start thinking in centuries, not just financial quarters. What would our communities look like if we all committed to living in one place for our entire lives? Is our modern mobility a form of freedom, or is it a form of rootlessness that disconnects us from real responsibility? How can we create economic and political systems that reward long-term thinking and stewardship instead of short-term exploitation? Is the monastic vow of stability the most radical and necessary environmental idea that we have forgotten? Number 8, what is the real cost of our impatience? We hate waiting. We get angry if a website takes more than 3 seconds to load. We pay extra for next day shipping. We honk in traffic. We want everything, and we want it now. Patience is not a virtue we celebrate. We see it as a form of passivity, a failure to act. The monk, however, cultivated patience as a core spiritual discipline. His entire life was a training in patience. The agricultural work was governed by the slow, unhurried rhythm of the seasons. You cannot force a seed to grow faster. The copying of a manuscript was an exercise in meticulous, painstaking effort that could take years. The spiritual journey itself was seen as a long, slow process of transformation, not a single moment of breakthrough. The rule of Saint Benedict constantly advises patience with oneself, with one's brothers, and with the difficulties of life. The abbot is told to manage all things with such moderation that the strong may have something to strive for, and the weak may not be dismayed. This is a call for a patient, measured approach to leadership in life. The monks understood that impatience is a form of anxiety. It's the desire to rush through the present moment to get to a future one that we believe will be better. But in doing so, we miss the life that is actually happening right now. The Benedictine life was designed to anchor the monk in the present moment. The regular cycle of prayer, the ora et labora rhythm of work and worship, the focus on the task at hand, all of these were tools to combat the restless, impatient mind. They knew that nothing of lasting value is created quickly. A cathedral, a forest, a community, a soul, these things are built slowly, over time, with steady, patient effort. Our culture celebrates the overnight success and the disruptive innovation. We value speed and novelty. The monks valued persistence and endurance. Their motto could have been slow and steady wins the race. Modern psychology is beginning to recognize the toxic effects of our collective impatience. Chronic impatience is linked to stress, high blood pressure, and heart disease. It damages our relationships as we become easily irritated with the people around us. It also impairs our decision making. When we are impatient, we tend to opt for short-term rewards over long-term benefits. This is known as temporal discounting in behavioral economics. The monk's life was a system designed to counteract this bias. By committing to a life of stability and slow, deliberate work, they were training their brains to value the future. They were literally practicing long-term thinking every single day. The fruit of this patience was not just personal peace, but also incredible productivity. Over the centuries, the patient, steady work of the monasteries created immense agricultural wealth, preserved classical knowledge, and built some of the most beautiful art and architecture the world has ever seen. They proved that patience is not passive, it is a powerful, creative force. Has our technology, by promising instant gratification, rewired our brains for impatience? What is the connection between our societal impatience and our inability to address long-term problems like climate change or national debt? If we were to consciously practice patience in one area of our lives, in traffic, in a conversation, with a difficult task, how would it change our experience? Is patience a skill that can be learned? And if so, what are the modern equivalents of the monastic practices that cultivated it? Number 7, is there a better way to read a book? We read constantly. News articles, emails, social media posts, text messages. We are the most literate society in history. But how do we read? We skim. We scroll. We look for keywords. We read for information, for data, for the gist of the argument. Our goal is to extract the content as quickly as possible and move on. The monk read in a completely different way. For him, reading was not about information acquisition. It was about spiritual transformation. The practice was called lectio divina, which means divine or sacred reading. It's a method of reading scripture that has been practiced in monasteries since the early days of Christianity. It is a slow, contemplative, and repetitive process. It's more like tasting a text than devouring it. Lectio divina has 4 distinct steps. First is lectio reading. You read a short passage of scripture slowly, perhaps even out loud, to hear the words. Second is meditatio, meditation, or reflection. You read the passage again and you ponder it. You think about what the words mean. You let them sink in. You chew on them, like a cow chewing its cud. The third step is oratio, prayer or response. You read the text a third time, and now you respond to it. You speak to God about what the passage has brought up in you. It's a dialogue. The final step is contemplatio, contemplation, or rest. You simply rest in silence, letting go of your own thoughts and allowing yourself to be present to the divine. This is a profoundly different way of engaging with a text. It's not about analysis or critique. It's about letting the text speak to you, about letting it change you. The goal isn't to master the text, but to let the text master you. This practice has powerful implications even if you are not religious. Imagine applying this method to a poem, a piece of philosophy, or a classic novel. It's a way of practicing deep reading. The neuroscientist Marianne Wolf, in her book Proust and the Squid, writes about how the act of deep reading, of slowly immersing oneself in a complex text, builds neural pathways in the brain that are essential for critical thinking, empathy, and reflection. These are the very pathways that she fears are being eroded by our modern habit of shallow screen-based reading. Nicholas Carr made a similar argument in his book The Shallows, suggesting that the internet is literally reshaping our brains to prefer short, disjointed snippets of information over long, sustained arguments. The monk's practice of Lectio Divina was an antidote to this kind of shallow thinking. It was a technology for cultivating a focused, contemplative mind. It was a way to build a rich inner world, not just a database of external facts. We think of reading as a silent, private activity, but for much of history, reading was done out loud. The monks would often mouth the words as they read, a practice called muttering. This engaged the body in the act of reading. It made the words physical, visceral. It slowed the process down and aided memorization. Lectio Divina is a full body, full mind experience. It's the opposite of the disembodied, hurried way we read on our screens. It reminds us that reading can be more than just a way to get information. It can be a way to find wisdom. Have we, in our pursuit of information, forgotten the purpose of reading? What if the most important texts in our lives should be read not once, but hundreds of times in this slow, contemplative way? Could the practice of Lectio Divina, applied to secular texts, be a powerful tool for developing empathy and emotional intelligence? Is the decline of deep reading not just a cognitive issue, but a spiritual one, leaving us information rich, but meaning poor? Number 6, are we meant to live alone? Our culture glorifies the individual. We celebrate independence, self-reliance, and personal freedom. Understanding that everything that people would do in research, the idea more people live alone than at any point in human history. We communicate through screens. We have hundreds of online friends, but may not know our next-door neighbor. This hyper-individualism is a recent experiment, and the results are not looking good. Rates of loneliness, depression, and anxiety are soaring. The U.S. Surgeon General has declared loneliness a public health epidemic. It turns out that we might not be designed to go it alone. The monastic life was a direct rejection of this kind of individualism. While there were some monks who lived as hermits eremites, the vast majority of monasticism, especially in the West, was cenobitic. This word comes from the Greek koinos bios, which means common life. Monks lived, worked, prayed, and ate together. The monastery was a community, and it was a community built on a radical idea, the suppression of the individual will for the good of the group. The Rule of St. Benedict is a blueprint for this common life. It is a masterpiece of social technology. It has detailed instructions for how to resolve conflicts, how to make decisions, how to share property monks owned nothing personally, and how to care for the sick and the elderly. The abbot is instructed to consult the entire community, even the youngest monks, on important matters. It was a life of radical interdependence. You relied on your brothers for everything, and they relied on you. This was not always easy. The rule acknowledges that the community will be full of difficult people and personality clashes. It provides tools and structures for dealing with this friction, seeing it not as a problem, but as an opportunity for spiritual growth. The monastery was a laboratory for learning how to love people who are not easy to love. It was a lifelong practice in patience, forgiveness, and compassion. Modern science confirms the profound human need for this kind of community. We are social animals. Our brains are wired for connection. Social isolation is as damaging to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Researchers like John Cacioppo have shown that chronic loneliness triggers physiological stress responses that lead to inflammation and a host of chronic diseases. Conversely, strong social bonds are one of the biggest predictors of health, happiness, and longevity. The famous Harvard study of adult development, which has tracked a group of men for over 80 years, found that the quality of one's relationships was the single most important factor for a long and happy life. The monks, in their own way, knew this. They understood that a good life is not found in a solitary pursuit of self-interest, but in a shared life of mutual service and commitment. The common life was not a rejection of the self, but a recognition that the self is only fully realized in relationship with others. has our pursuit of individual freedom come at the cost of the deep, committed relationships that we need to thrive? What if true freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the willing acceptance of mutual obligation and commitment? How can we build modern forms of common life in our fragmented and individualistic society? Is the pain of loneliness a signal from our evolutionary past, telling us that we have strayed too far from the communal way of life for which we were designed? Number 5. What if owning less meant having more? Our society runs on desire. Advertising exists to make us feel that we are not enough, that we need a new car, a new phone, a new wardrobe to be happy and successful. Consumerism is our unofficial religion. We work hard to buy things we don't need, to impress people we don't like. The result is debt, anxiety, and a planet groaning under the weight of our consumption. The monk took a vow of poverty. This wasn't just about living simply. It was a radical statement about the nature of happiness and freedom. The monk owned nothing personally, not his robes, not his tools, not even the book he was reading. Everything was held in common by the community. Chapter 33 of the Rule of St. Benedict is blunt. This vice especially is to be cut out of the monastery by the roots. Let no one presume to give or receive anything without the order of the abbot, or to have anything of his own. This practice was designed to liberate the monk from the anxiety of ownership. If you own nothing, you have nothing to worry about losing. You are not consumed by the desire to acquire more, or the fear of having your possessions stolen or damaged. Your mind is free to focus on more important things. This idea runs completely counter to our cultural narrative, which equates net worth with self-worth. But there is a growing movement of people who are rediscovering the wisdom of monastic simplicity. We call it minimalism. People like Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus, the minimalists, have popularized the idea of intentionally living with less. They argue that by getting rid of our clutter, we can make room for the things that truly matter: relationships, experiences, and personal growth. This is not about deprivation, it's about curation. It's about consciously choosing what to bring into your life. The monk's life, while simple, was not deprived. Monasteries were often beautiful places. The monks had good, simple food, a secure place to live, and meaningful work. Their lives were in many ways much richer than our own cluttered, stressful ones. Their poverty was a strategic choice. It was a tool for achieving a different kind of wealth, a wealth of time, a wealth of focus, and a wealth of inner peace. Psychological research supports this. The link between money and happiness is surprisingly weak. After our basic needs are met, more money and more stuff do not lead to significantly more happiness. In fact, materialism is strongly correlated with unhappiness. A study by Tim Kasser, a psychologist and author of The High Price of Materialism, found that people who prioritize wealth and possessions report lower levels of well-being and higher levels of anxiety and depression. The constant pursuit of more keeps us on a hedonic treadmill. We get a brief thrill from a new purchase, but then we adapt and we need something else to give us the next hit. The monks chose to step off this treadmill altogether. Their vow of poverty was a vow of sanity in a world that was, even then, beginning to be consumed by material desire. It was a declaration that a person's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Is our obsession with acquiring possessions a way to distract ourselves from a deeper sense of spiritual or existential emptiness? What would you get rid of if you were no longer concerned with what other people thought of you? If you were to define wealth not in terms of money or possessions, but in terms of time, freedom, and relationships, how wealthy would you be? Could the voluntary poverty of the monks be the ultimate luxury in our overcluttered world? Number 4, can a strict schedule actually make you free? Most of us resist schedules. We see them as a form of confinement. We value spontaneity and flexibility. We want to keep our options open. The idea of a life where every hour is planned out in advance sounds like a prison. The monk's life was precisely this. It was governed by the horarium, a detailed daily timetable. This schedule was built around the 8 prayer services of the Divine Office, but it also included specific times for reading Lectio Divina, manual labor, labora, meals, and sleep. The day was meticulously structured, from the pre-dawn prayers of matins to the final prayers of compline before bed. It was the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. To us, this sounds repetitive and monotonous. But the monks discovered a paradox. This rigid structure was profoundly liberating. The schedule wasn't a cage, it was a trellis. It provided a support structure on which a life of focus and peace could grow. Here's how it works. Our brains have a limited amount of energy for making decisions. This is often referred to as decision fatigue. The more decisions we have to make in a day, what to wear, what to eat, what to work on next, the more our mental energy gets depleted. By the end of the day, our willpower is low, and we are more likely to make poor choices. The monastic horarium eliminated almost all of these trivial decisions. The monk never had to ask, "What should I do now?" The answer was always clear: it is the hour of prayer, or it is the hour of work. By automating the structure of his day, he saved his mental energy for the things that truly mattered: his spiritual practice and his work. The routine freed his mind from the constant low-level anxiety of managing his own time. The schedule carried him through the day whether he felt motivated or not. The feeling of, "I don't feel like it," was irrelevant. The bell rang, and you went to the chapel. This built a powerful discipline that was not dependent on fleeting moods or inspiration. This is a principle that many highly productive people have discovered for themselves. They create routines and rituals to automate the mundane parts of their lives so they can conserve their focus for their most important work. Think of the writer who writes at the same time every morning, or the athlete who follows a strict training regimen. They are using structure to create freedom. The psychologist Roy Baumeister has done extensive research on willpower and self-control, showing that it is a limited resource. The monastic life was a brilliantly designed system for managing this resource. The community, the schedule, the simple environment, all of it worked together to reduce temptation and support a life of discipline. In our modern world, we are faced with an overwhelming number of choices. We have an infinite number of things we could be doing at any given moment. This paradox of choice, as described by psychologist Barry Schwartz, often leads to paralysis and anxiety, not freedom. The monks show us that true freedom might not be about having unlimited options, but about consciously choosing your constraints. If decision fatigue is real, how many of our bad habits and poor choices are simply a result of a poorly structured day? What if the most creative and productive life is not the most spontaneous one, but the most disciplined one? Could a personal horarium, a simple, repeated daily schedule, be the key to reducing anxiety and increasing focus in our chaotic lives? Is our modern obsession with keeping our options open a trap that prevents us from ever committing to anything deeply? Number 3, why is working with your hands so important? Much of our modern work is abstract. We sit in front of screens, moving pixels and numbers around. We attend meetings, write reports, and send emails. At the end of the day, it can be hard to point to a tangible result of our labor. We feel disconnected from the physical world. This is a very recent development in human history. For the monks, manual labor was not a distraction from their spiritual life. It was an essential part of it. The rule of Saint Benedict is very clear on this. Idleness is the enemy of the soul. Therefore, the brothers should have specified periods for manual labor as well as for prayerful reading. Their work was seen as a form of prayer, a way to honor God by participating in the act of creation. It also served a very practical purpose. The monasteries had to be self-sufficient. They grew their own food, constructed their own buildings, and produced their own goods. But the value of labor went far beyond the practical. It was seen as a way to cultivate humility, discipline, and a connection to the material world. By working with his hands, the monk was grounded in reality. He couldn't just live in a world of abstract ideas. He had to deal with the stubbornness of soil, the grain of wood, and the weight of stone. This union of the intellectual and the manual, the head and the hand, is something we have largely lost. We have created a divide between white-collar knowledge work and blue-collar manual work, and we tend to value the former far more than the latter. The philosopher and motorcycle mechanic Matthew Crawford, in his book Shop Class as Soulcraft, argues that this is a huge mistake. He makes a powerful case for the intellectual and psychological rewards of manual labor. Working with your hands requires problem-solving, attention to detail, and a deep engagement with the physical world. It provides a clear and immediate feedback loop. Either the engine runs, or it doesn't. Either the joint is tight, or it's loose. This can be incredibly satisfying in a way that abstract work often is not. It provides a sense of agency and competence. You can point to a finished object, a table, a garden, a repaired machine, and say, "I made that," or "I fixed that." Neuroscience is now providing a scientific basis for what the monks and craftsmen have always known. The human brain is not a computer in a skull. It is deeply connected to the body. The parts of our brain that control our hands are surprisingly large and complex. There is a rich, constant flow of information between our hands and our minds. Engaging our hands in skilled activity can actually make us smarter. It can also be a powerful form of therapy. The state of being completely absorbed in a manual task is what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. It's a state of energized focus where your sense of self disappears and you are fully immersed in the activity. This state is deeply rewarding and is associated with happiness and well-being. The monk's rhythm of ora et labora was a perfect recipe for a balanced life. It combined the contemplative with the active, the mental with the physical. It ensured that the monk was a whole, integrated human being, not just a disembodied intellect. What is the psychological cost of a society that devalues manual skills and tangible work? Has our shift to knowledge work created a population that feels competent in the virtual world but helpless and inept in the physical one? Could the rise of hobbies like woodworking, knitting, and gardening be a subconscious reaction against the abstraction of modern life? If idleness is the enemy of the soul, what is the spiritual effect of a work life that feels intangible and meaningless? Number 2, how can silence fix our noisy minds? Try to find a truly silent place. It's almost impossible. Even in a quiet room, there's the hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of a light, the distant sound of traffic. Our world is saturated with noise, and when there is no external noise, we create our own internal noise, the constant chatter of our thoughts, anxieties, and plans. We are never really quiet. The monastery was and is a place dedicated to the cultivation of silence. Many monastic orders, like the Carthusians and the Trappists, practice almost complete silence. Even in a standard Benedictine monastery, there are designated times and places for silence, such as during meals, in the cloister, and during the Great Silence, from the end of the day until the first prayer of the morning. This silence was not an empty void, it was not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace. For the monks, silence was an essential prerequisite for prayer and contemplation. You cannot hear the still, small voice of God if you are constantly surrounded by noise. Silence was the environment in which the soul could grow. This wasn't just a spiritual practice, it was a deeply psychological one. The monks understood that a quiet environment leads to a quiet mind. When you are not being bombarded by external stimuli, your brain can relax. Your nervous system can downshift from the fight or flight mode of the sympathetic nervous system to the rest and digest mode of the parasympathetic nervous system. This has measurable physiological effects. Studies have shown that silence can lower blood pressure, reduce cortisol levels, and boost the immune system. A 2013 study on mice found that 2 hours of silence per day prompted cell development in the hippocampus, the brain region related to the formation of memory. The lead researcher Imke Kirste noted that silence, in a strange way, was the stimulus that was having the most significant effect. It seems that when the brain is not busy processing external sound, it can engage in a kind of self-repair and regeneration. The constant noise of our world is not just an annoyance, it's a health issue. The World Health Organization has linked noise pollution to a range of problems, including sleep disturbance, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive impairment in children. But perhaps the most damaging effect is on our ability to think. The constant stream of noise and information fragments our attention and makes it difficult to engage in deep, reflective thought. The monks protected their minds by protecting their silence. In the quiet of the monastery, they could focus for long hours on their work and their reading. They could pay attention to the subtle movements of their own hearts and minds. The silence wasn't a punishment or a deprivation. It was a luxury. It was a gift they gave to themselves and to each other. It was the necessary condition for a life of depth and meaning. In our noisy world, the radical act of seeking out and creating silence may be one of the most important things we can do for our mental and spiritual health. If silence is so beneficial for the brain, why are we so afraid of it? What does the constant chatter of our inner monologue prevent us from hearing, both in ourselves and in the world around us? Could a daily practice of just 10 minutes of intentional silence be a powerful antidote to modern anxiety and distraction? Is our addiction to noise and stimulation a way of avoiding the difficult and important questions that arise only in the quiet? Number 1, what is the most important question? We spend our lives asking questions. How can I get a better job? How can I be more productive? Where should I go on vacation? How can I be happy? These are the questions that drive us. They are focused on the self, on our own desires and our own improvement. We are the main character in our own story. The entire life of the monk was an attempt to ask a different kind of question. It was a question that reoriented his entire being. The question was not, what do I want, but what does God want? This might sound like a purely religious question, but you can frame it in a secular way. What is my purpose? What is my life in service of? What does the world need from me? It's a shift from an inward-looking, self-centered perspective to an outward-looking, service-oriented one. This is the fundamental piece of wisdom from which all the others flow. The silence, the work, the community, the humility, they were all tools to help the monk get his own ego out of the way so he could better hear the answer to this one fundamental question. This shift in perspective is at the heart of what many psychologists and philosophers consider a meaningful life. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that happiness cannot be pursued directly. It is a byproduct, it ensues from a life of purpose, a life dedicated to a cause greater than oneself or to a person other than oneself. He wrote, for success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. The monks would have agreed their goal was not personal happiness or self-fulfillment in the modern sense. Their goal was to serve God and their community. And yet, in giving up the pursuit of their own happiness, they often found a deep and abiding joy. This is the ultimate paradox. Our culture tells us that the way to be happy is to focus on ourselves, to satisfy our desires, to achieve our personal goals. The monks teach us the opposite. The way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to something larger. The structure of their life was a constant reminder of this. The vow of obedience was about surrendering their own will. The vow of poverty was about surrendering their own possessions. The vow of stability was about surrendering their own freedom of movement. It was a systematic dismantling of the ego. What was left was a person who was free from the constant, anxious striving that defines so much of modern life. A person who was available to respond to the needs of the moment, the needs of their brothers, and the call of their purpose. Their life was not about self-improvement, it was about self-transcendence. And that, perhaps, is the most profound piece of wisdom they have to offer us. It is the answer that can only be found when we finally stop asking what we can get from the world and start asking what we can give. What if the relentless pursuit of personal happiness is the very thing that makes us unhappy? If you were to stop asking, what do I want, and instead start asking, what is needed of me, how would your life change? Is it possible that the deepest and most lasting form of fulfillment comes not from achieving our own goals, but from surrendering them to a higher purpose? What is the one thing you could serve that is greater than yourself, and what is stopping you from doing it?